I'm just what I was asking was why are we doing a fire episode in November? I mean, like Pentecost, heck, even Transfiguration, I think you could argue. But
You-
November? Really?
But November, you know what? It sounds sincere, but it's a perfect setup, Jacob, because I'm going to tell you, November, just like you got to have Monster Month in October, November is going to be end of the world month. And so
End
we're
of
going
the
to be
world month.
end of the
It's
world
end of the
because
world month on
it's
Voyage Comics
it's end of the
Podcast.
world as we know it.
Oh, I
Which
feel fine.
Welcome to the Voyage Podcast, a show that traverses the oceans of myth and legend through the lens of Catholic theology and philosophy. Come aboard as we set sail in pursuit of the heroic life and Christian virtue, with your hosts, Mike Schramm and Jacob Platty.
So I wanted fire to be part of our end of the world month I wanted to be in November, which includes Pentecost. But as you'll notice in our outline, Jacob, that is not the only biblical story with fire.
Can I admit something to you?
Please.
I haven't looked at the outline.
That's
And you know what?
we're
It's
all
because
shocked.
yeah. I think after a month of mainly producing the outlines, all the good episodes outlines were mine. I take it back though. Actually, what I'm saying the opposite, frankly, is I feel like our episodes work better when I just have no idea what you're talking about. And then now that I've sat there and listened through all the October episodes where I was in charge of making the outlines, I mean, I think they're good. I think they're worth listening to. But I think it's time we got back to basics, Mike.
Went back to you have to go back on brand. Yeah.
We got to get back on brand. And
Yep,
I
that's
think
right.
that,
And
it's about time that I just show up.
I'm the stuffy buttoned up one who has a plan, and
Yep.
you're the guy who just rolls on, I'm surprised you even have the headphones on, to be honest. It's
you know what? It's a new day and it's time to get back to the basics. So, and that means I have no idea what's in your outline.
November for on the Western calendar, we're getting close to the end of the liturgical year. And so what you notice in the readings is that they look more and more end of the world-ish. So you'll have like Jesus prophesying the destruction of the temple. The last Sunday of the calendar is Matthew 25 with the separating of the sheep and the goats. So you've got a lot of the end of the world sorts of themes that it's kind of building up to in November. And
I'm
so I
kind of
thought
surprised. This is one of those things where the Eastern and the Western churches must have really kind of started to take on different trajectories or something like that, because that is not unless I'm mistaken. Honestly, what if I am mistaken? What if no, that's not true though, because our new year did start back in September, like liturgically.
Yeah.
Our liturgical new year. Wait,
No,
is that?
and I remember us either talking about this or me hearing about this, and like obviously it's just depending on which reason you're sort of giving for it. So does it have to do with the Nativity of Mary? Is that why?
I think so. Yeah,
Is
I
that
do.
because
I
that's
think
in November? That's September 8th. I thought
that's
that was
September.
why.
I think that's that's how I've always understood it, is that
Okay.
you just begin the salvation history over again, and it begins with the birth of Mary, right? Like,
So it's a similar vein, but so in the Western side it begins with Advent, which again is the you're preparing for and then obviously celebrating the birth of Jesus at the Nativity. So you have the 4 weeks of Advent, which are like the four, that's like the start of the new liturgical, like that's when it restarts.
yeah, no, I got you. I mean, you
So
guys just don't care about Mary as much as we do. I get it.
Oh, I thought you, and then I would respond with, "We just care more about Jesus than Eastern Orthodox people," because I feel like you just lobbed that over the plate
frankly,
perfectly.
it didn't really work out for me, did it?
No, yeah.
Okay.
Which, yeah, it's kind of one of those very hack.
To care
like,
about Mary is to
we
care
just happen
about
to care about
Jesus.
the Bible. Yep,
Yeah.
exactly. Very good. Which is, which is what the Catholic is supposed to say when they hear it from a Protestant about, caring more about Jesus than Mary, because that's actually the typical back and forth.
Oh yeah, that's how you're supposed to respond to that.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
So, uh, You want to know what my opening line was? I was to say this episode is elementary, my dear Jacob, because we're going to be talking about one of the four. We're going to be talking about fire. So,
elements. I was like, Sherlock Holmes.
See,
What's that have to do with fire?
Yeah, it's elementary. I know. See,
okay.
it's just so many references.
I had to think
pulled
too
into
hard.
one.
I had to think too hard for that. You know what? At least I feel a little bit better, because initially I thought, you know what, this is it. This is the one where I get fired. And this is just Mike's, backhanded way of, this is the beginning of the end for old Jacob.
Well,
Time to
gosh, it's about fire. It's about the end, and so this would be a perfect kind of ease into it, wouldn't it?
That's what I was assuming.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe it's just your liturgical calendar after all. So
hey, it still can be. Don't worry. Yeah, there's still
the jury's still out.
I was going to say the way that this very natural banter has gone. Don't put it past our intrepid producer.
Are you? Maybe what I need to do is get more fired up about this episode, so that
that's
I
the thing.
get to keep my job.
I threw you 5 bones. I gave you a 5 Tuesday month, a 5-week month.
It's true
for Monster Month, and you can't give me a little bit once it's not all on Jacob, then not all about what Jacob wants to do.
It's the Holy Spirit that's been slighted, Mike. And you know what Jesus says about offending the Holy Spirit.
By which one of us? That's the
This is a Pentecost episode. This is a Pentecost episode
It's
happening
not,
in the middle of November.
You're trying to make this a Pentecost episode when, as you'll see, it's much more than Pentecost.
Okay.
So let's go into.
I'm half of this. I can make this as Pentecosty as I want if I just keep bringing it up.
That's what do they call that in improv? Yeah. What is that?
I don't know.
So where do we see? First, we gotta back up, or maybe not back up like before the Bible, but necessarily like independent of the Old Testament and the New Testament. We see fire in a lot of mythology. We see it in a lot of ancient stories, and so that's what I kind of want to run through first. So, what are some? I mean, like I said, the most obvious ones are the first ones that come to your head when you think of fire and mythology.
Admittedly, what popped into my head just now, because I just watched it with my 8-year-old, is Moana.
Okay.
Just like 2 days ago, I watched Moana with my kid, and that's got a big old lava fire. Tafiti. I'm spoiling this movie. Yeah, Taka. Yeah. I mean,
why'd you get it mixed up, Jacob?
Yeah, I don't know.
It's okay.
Never mind. Yeah.
It's
Taka.
So yeah.
Anyway, big old fire monster.
Well, and it's a good one, and like you said, the big spoil, the big reveal is that there is this very close connection between the power of fire and the life, that when it was properly ordered, they kind of went together hand in hand, right? And when it was disordered, that's when you start to see death brought to the islands, to the community, and all that stuff. So no, it's a good example. I mean, more of our modern mythology in the Disney movie, right? What about like Prometheus is definitely like the classic
bringing
one, right?
Fire. Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah.
Brings the fire to humanity from the gods. And I like that kind of how it sets up a little bit of a story too. What were you going to say though?
Only that I wish that I had prepared more for this episode, because it's like, there's all kinds of fire stuff out there.
I'll keep feeding you stuff. That's fine.
Okay. All right. What's the next? What else you got?
Well, no, I don't want to go into the next one yet. So Prometheus,
okay.
The big thing about, so he's stealing the fire from the gods. And do you remember how, I mean, not that it's super relevant, but it's just kind of a cool detail how he gets punished, or what his punishment is.
Oh yeah. He gets chained up onto, I forget what mountain it is, but he gets chained up, and an eagle always has to come down and eat his liver. Isn't that
it? And it regenerates.
Yeah, and every day the liver comes back, and then the eagle just comes back and eats his liver again.
Which I feel like there's more to that symbolism, but this isn't a liver episode. We'll have to save that for, maybe we'll do that on Pentecost weekend. We'll do a liver episode just to spite you. I'll do that.
Because that would make sense. Yeah, we'll do the fire episode in November, and we'll do the liver episode in late spring, early summer. Because
So,
but hey, I think just to throw that out there, that's probably a reference to the fact that ancient people considered like the seat of intellect more in their bowels than in their brain. And so I can't be for sure. I'm just guessing on this, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was more like like the essence of Prometheus was in his liver, and
Okay.
so maybe that's why the liver specifically.
Well, and it's kind of like a death that never ends because, like you said, if it's taking out the self, but then it keeps coming back only to be suffered to be lost again. So it's sort of like, I mean, it's kind of like the lake of fire where you never die, you keep experiencing it, sort of thing. But now just the eagle keeps eating the liver back.
You know, the liver is the one organism that will always regenerate itself,
That's what I thought was
even
interesting
in
too.
real anatomy. And it's like, do they know that? Is that
I
why
know
his
that's
liver
what's
keeps coming
crazy
back?
is that pre-scientific, they that was what they chose to.
Like
It's
really way pre-scientific too.
Yeah, that's what's I
Um,
mean, that is what's cool about well, what I wanted to emphasize is so what it assumes, right? The fact that Prometheus has to steal the fire and then give it to the people is that there's this sort of like competitive antagonistic relationship between humanity and divinity, right? The gods are withholding something.
mm,
And it takes this this whatever titan or champion,
yeah.
but it takes Prometheus to do this. Now, even the gods at the end of the story say that it wasn't necessarily the best thing. It's almost like you have a taking the apple from the tree, taking a
Oh, it
fruit from the
is.
tree,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
because
and
we weren't ready for it. Is kind of the
yeah, and honestly, some of the early Lord of Spirits episode stuff talks a lot about this whole Promethean story. And
yeah.
I don't think it's at all uh surprising that basically the kind of Miltonian Satan, better to reign in hell than rule or be a slave in heaven or whatever,
Mhm.
gets mixed into this Promethean imagery, right? So
Yeah.
like in both cases you have the idea that like the champion of humanity is going to go and steal this intelligence from the divinities up above, that are kind of begrudging it to humanity, and he's going to be a hero to them by showing them, by enlightening them, right? With
Yeah.
fire, like they're going to be enlightened, right? Yeah, super satanic imagery. Of course, obviously within the
Well,
Greek myths, it's and even Satan's called the light bringer, right?
mhm.
So
Lucifer specifically, but
Lucifer,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So I don't know. I think this is the type of stuff that I find like super fascinating. Is like,
Yeah.
is Prometheus just Satan? Is just full
Mhm.
on? Is just because the parallels are just so
Well,
obvious, right?
and if you want a nice callback to Monster Month. Now, I know we didn't do this monster specifically, but Frankenstein or the
The
modern
modern
Prometheus.
Prometheus. Yep,
So
there it
there's
is.
there's your Monster Month connection for you. It's all tied together. But
It's true.
like I said, I wanted to first highlight that, in that story, like I said, you have this antagonistic or competitive relationship between humanity and the gods. Um, but what is it? What's the object? It's fire specifically. And
Hmm.
like we even get as sort of a warning at the end of a lot of versions of that myth is that, hey, maybe it's just the humans weren't ready for this yet. And we've kind of shown that when we get this really good technology, really good tool, we can do some really good things, but it can also be to our own destruction. Right. And I know that
You
kind of
know
gets
what?
into
Just to tie it back into Monster Month, we were just talking about that with Dracula.
mm,
Science and progress and all that stuff doesn't have to be the enemy of faith. And as long as it's
mm,
being used in order to fight evil, it's
ordered
totally
towards its
cool.
proper end. Yeah,
Exactly.
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 So another thing in just Greek mythology in general is they had two types of fire. They had the
Mm.
fire of the hearth and the fire of the forge. And you can even tell just by the two descriptions how they're different uses, right?
Mhm.
And we even in our own regular lives, we can see how the fire of the hearth obviously is about cultivation, about civilization, about bringing people together. Whereas
Oh, it's
forge
killing me.
is
Well, I was just listening to a random podcast, where he was talking about the Latin word for, um, hearth is it's an English, like, we have an English word. Alright, you keep going. I'm gonna Google this because it was fascinating. Alright,
okay.
take it away, Mike.
So so I was saying how the hearth is the one type of fire, which obviously because it has this different type of purpose, and then the forge is this different type of fire in that it is ordered towards the building up of, you'd say, the more, I mean, mechanical or the more almost utilitarian. It has a utilitarian purpose, whereas the hearth has the, I guess you could almost say, like, charitable purpose. Um,
So, you
but
ready?
yeah, go ahead.
You ready for my get
There
this?
was
Because
no dead air, I promise. Yeah.
this is awesome. Focus.
Uh-huh.
No, that's the he's like, "No, seriously, focus, Mike, focus." No. No,
Yeah.
that's Latin for hearth. So they
Uh-huh.
called their little hearth fire, it was their focus, right?
Mhm.
And so in other words, it was like the epicenter of the family. And so like
Yeah.
when people would come in and gather around, before they had television, kids, they had fires. They
They'd
had
watch the dancing images. Yeah, the
the
dancing
family
images of the
fire, yeah,
4.
and it would be the
Mhm.
type of thing where, when people were just, like, gathered around, they could kinda zone out into the fire and,
Mhm.
just casually talk, and then when they weren't talking, they would just, check out the fire kinda thing. It was their
I
focus.
I actually think I've seen almost like a comic strip or a joke making fun of like, "Are you gonna stare at that thing all day?" And it's kids watching the fire because that's the thing is like in the same way that parents will look at their kids and be like, "Oh, it's just moving images, it's just dancing images." And it's like, yeah, exactly. We've always been fascinated by that. But so and I think the thing about focus is actually interesting too. And this will kind of take us off on a rabbit trail. I don't want to go too far down, but there is this kind of strain of thought in philosophy where like love is just the attention, right? Love is based
Mhm.
off the idea of attention, right? And obviously
Yeah.
human attention. And so when you call it the focus, and this is specifically to the hearth where the family is coming together, and it doesn't just mean focus on the fire itself. Like you said, it causes them to focus on each other.
Well, yeah, it becomes just
Then
something the thing that the individuals orbit around,
And
right?
so the hearth, like I kind of mentioned, I think you were kind of searching for it, but I said like the forge has that kind of utilitarian, whereas the hearth is more charity. And so
Mhm.
you can see, like you said, the focus kind of connection and all that stuff.
Yeah.
What about in Norse
I knew
mythology?
that it would play right into, what you wanted to
Hmm.
talk about, Mike. I had no doubt.
Exactly. What
Well, and
about
just to put a
oh yeah.
cap on that, I like the and, it makes me think of, like, Hephaestus, right?
Mhm.
The tool maker,
Yep.
at his forge, at his fire kinda thing. And, just to get onto my old hobby horse, we're talking about techny, right? We're
Hmm.
talking about the form of magic that involves crafting things and using fire in order to craft stuff. Out of sheer curiosity, can you guys hear my cat caterwauling in the background?
I maybe heard it right before you said something, but if it's been going on the whole time, I haven't
Alright.
heard it.
Well, audience, if you just hear a cat wailing in the background, that's that's just what it is. Recording from home.
That's metaphorical for the that's
Yeah.
for how people feel when they listen to Jacob. So
Yeah.
it's all a
They
metaphor.
just can they would have never guessed it because they would assume it was just me still, right?
Yeah,
It's just like just
exactly.
caterwauling coming from that side of the screen. Um, no, but anyway, like so that type of fire is like the technique, right? And I actually
Mhm.
think that is depending upon how you want to phrase it, that's almost like if Prometheus is a good guy, then perhaps he's bringing charity, right? But if Prometheus is
Mm.
a bad guy, then perhaps he's bringing technique. He's bringing the fire in order to manipulate the world kind of stuff.
Well,
And
and again, not that I'm always one to like defend the Greek gods by any means, but I wonder if when they kind of give that warning at the end of the story, it's like we can't distinguish, right? The same way that they can. It's not as clear to us as it is to the gods on Olympus. And so that's kind of part of our problem, which will kind of play into some of the other characters and examples I want to go through. What about do we want to go right to end of the world stuff? Since I said this is kind of end of the world month, we got Ragnarok,
yeah, that's true.
right?
Um, that's kind of interesting. I think I brought this up in a previous episode at some point, but in Viking mythology, the origin of the cosmos is the mixture of fire and water.
Mm.
And then the steam that comes from the fire and the water is what all the elements are made out of and things like
I
that.
think I joked that they should make a song about that, but
Oh, yeah,
yeah,
yes, that's right. Yes,
yeah,
what a
yeah,
callback.
exactly,
Um,
yeah.
but and so yeah, it kind of begins in fire, kind of ends in fire, right?
Mhm.
Um, and
So
that
that sort of oh, go ahead, sorry.
no, I was just about to say that that's kind of a nihilistic kind of fire. That's kind of, red
Well,
sun, dying sun type stuff, heat exhaustion
yeah.
of the universe type stuff.
Well, and the idea of the full circle part of it, like you said, it in a lot of ways it is or it can be, but it doesn't always have to be because it has that sense of renewal or purification as well when it comes to fire. And that kind of brings us to another example is the phoenix, right?
Mhm.
This is where you plug the Phantom Phoenix comic series by Voyage, by the way, Jacob.
Yeah, there's a fantastic comic out there that
Is
actually
there?
uses that Phoenix motif. Yeah, super cool. Takes
Did
place in
did
Chicago
did you
back in
hear
the
that,
day.
producer? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm telling you, best comic you're gonna find. You get like
So
17 copies for yourself
just
and
give
your
them
nieces and
out.
nephews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, the
Christmas is
Phoenix.
coming up, folks, right around the corner.
I know it's the end of the world, but you still gotta. Yeah, exactly. So
Christmas is
the
the end of the world
Phoenix.
for many of us, isn't it? But
I mean, well, we got end of the year too, right? We got that whole kind of death that happens in the winter time and all that.
oh, I thought you were just. I was making a joke. That's the end of my bank account, but
Oh yeah.
Anyway,
it's all credit. So it's not real.
Yeah.
So again, the Phoenix has long been a Christian symbol, but even before Christianity, it was a symbol of rebirth or recycling, but also purification. But obviously, in the Christian context, it became the symbol of resurrection.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so, just if and again, I know don't mean to jump around too much, but the Phoenix character, what does it live for 100 years, 500 years, 500 years, I think is the story. The bird, and then it burns up, and then from the ashes emerges the new phoenix, the new cycle of the phoenix, or the new bird.
Well, in a lot of, I'm sure this is probably true in Catholic churches, but the peacock is a motif that you'll see in a lot of just like filigree artwork.
Mhm.
The stuff that fills in the gaps between icons and things like that, or um, yeah. So the peacock is a useful symbol that gets used a lot just for like simple decorative purposes. And if
Mhm.
I'm not mistaken, it's because the peacock and the phoenix got kind of like intermingled in the ancient
Okay.
mind. And
Yeah.
so I don't remember, I might be making this up, with me you never know, but I'm pretty sure that's true. I'm not sure when it started happening, but yeah, the
Yeah.
idea is that like the peacocks were actually this kind of like phoenix waiting to happen or something like that.
Okay.
So, and that's why you see peacocks a lot of the time in like church
Well,
stuff.
and I wonder if too, just like you said, when there's this sort of conflation that may have happened in a lot of the ancient minds, where it's like you have the bright, colorful feathers, and
Mhm.
almost and like some of them do reflect light; they become sort of dazzling.
Well,
And
and
so,
if you look at the little eyeball on the tail feathers, like the fins of them, at the very top, it,
Mhm.
it kind of forms like a circular pattern kind of thing. But it almost looks like a little flame. It almost looks like the kind of like different visual elements that you'd see in a flame, like
Yeah.
the hottest part being the blue, and then the wider areas being the kind of yellow orange and things like that. I don't know. I'm just
Yeah.
spitballing here, but that might be it.
So so and there are, of course, other creatures associated with fire. We talked about the phoenix, which is like the positive example. We have the dragon, right?
The dragon.
Which, I
Um,
mean, yeah, go ahead.
in Eastern cultures, dragons are divinities, right? Deities
Mhm.
that were responsible for bringing good fortune, and also all kinds of stuff, right? But I think this is personally interesting. I think that the best way for Western minds to understand what dragons are for Eastern minds is angels. That
Okay.
when you think of how dragons are used in areas like China and Tibet
Mhm.
and things like that, um, the proper corollary is angelic beings, which we've talked about this, I think, in the past. If not, we're going to right now. The serpent in the garden, Satan is a snake, right? He's a dragon.
Mhm.
The book of Revelation, he's called a dragon, right?
Mhm.
And so, there's this idea that in the West, dragons are like a symbol of terror or badness or evil or something like that. And it's like,
Yeah.
why are they considered evil in the West but good in the East? And I think it's because they're the same creature. It's just that the West has an understanding of the dragons have fallen, right?
Mm.
Whereas in the East, they didn't get the memo. And
Mm.
so, and even then, I still think that um, things like seraphim, the
Or
word seraphim means
burning ones.
burning ones, right?
Yeah.
But they also have a serpentine kind of like element to their etymology. And that's because snakes would bite you and then you'd get fevers, right? Like the poison would give you a fever kind of thing.
Yeah.
But
Fire in your blood, basically.
yeah, but if you conflate all that with just like dragon symbology, right?
Mhm.
Um, I do think that the idea is that the seraphim, the highest angels, the most divine angels, the holiest angels, are serpentine, right? And so
Yeah.
like and I mean I get it. I know that they have 6 wings and eyes and so they're not always depicted as serpents, right? But there is something to that. And I do think that plays
Biblically
into
accurate dragons. That's what you
yeah,
that's the
yeah.
meme. That's the meme.
Well, and I think that's
Yeah.
why and that dragon
Well,
lore, that imagery just never left the
and
East,
to kind of
right?
bring it back too, like if they're nothing more than just metaphors for spiritual realities, if you're just using the word dragon for that, then it does at least allow for, right? There are good spiritual realities as well as evil ones or
Oh
fallen
yeah.
ones.
The
So
angels, some most stayed, some fell,
yeah.
right? And so like the idea that dragons would be beneficent in the East, I think is very much correlative to the idea that angels are here to help us in the West.
And since this is, whether you like it or not, Jacob, this is still a fire episode. If dragons are have this sort of like spiritual metaphorical quality, and obviously when people think of dragons, at least the characters in movies, TV shows, but also in older stories, it's about the things that breathe fire. And so it can be this, not only does it attach this sort of like spiritual significance to fire when you have this fire creature or fire lizard that has this spiritual kind of connotation, but what specifically? Because like if the phoenix is all about the kind of purification and rebirth that happens through fire, dragons can be the malice and the destruction, but the power of destruction and fire. And there's one more example, since I love my
Wait, are you
my
moving on from
tropes.
dragons?
If that's okay, if that's all right.
Wait,
We
no, let me give
we
one more
don't
thought
have
on it.
all
Okay.
right.
We're like far into this
I
conversation.
was gonna say, yeah, we
Yeah, okay. Well, no, this is good though. This is good. You're gonna like this. One of the things that dragons come to symbolize in the West is the confrontation, like the hero's journey type stuff, where you have to go
mhm,
out into the wilderness, you have to fight the dragon, and then you bring back the gold to the civilization, right, to your village and stuff like that. So specifically in the West, dragons come to be things that hoard wealth, right?
mhm,
Well, how Promethean is that? You know what I
mhm.
mean? So now you
Yeah,
have the idea that if you can go and fight the dragon or confront the dragon, you get his riches, and those riches
yeah.
benefit your village, right? So that's
Oh,
that's just
yeah.
Prometheus all over again, and so it's all just kind of mingled
It's
together.
harnessing the new technology, right? Dragons were the oh,
Hmm.
you're gonna love this. Dragons were the Henry Ford or the Elon Musk of the mythical world, right? Or like you said, Prometheus.
So they were
Prometheus is
super
the
anti-Semitic.
I would say they were if you know what, ready to check the
Henry
bingo card?
Ford, not Elon Musk. I don't know anything about Elon Musk, so
Um, if you ready to check the bingo card, they were the Saruman. I mean, that is ultimately
well,
like
wait a
that's
second. You
the
went Saruman? Why not Smog? If you're gonna go Lord of the Rings stuff, you got to go Smog because he's literally a dragon.
yeah, that's too little too on the snout, if you know what I mean.
Uh
Um,
huh.
so
Yeah.
I wanted to
Wouldn't want to
I
burn your audience with so obvious
yeah.
analogy.
Yeah. So there's one less, I mean, I'd say a little bit lesser known. You mentioned Hero's Journey, which is a perfect segue. Because again, this isn't a dragon podcast either. It's a fire pod or a fire episode. And not fire the financial independence retire early either. This is real
Uh huh.
fire.
Okay.
But
Hey, that's real
in
for those
Arabic,
people, Mike.
in Arabic mythology, do you know the jinns? Are you familiar with the jinns?
Oh yeah. Oh
Now,
yeah.
what trope
Fascinating.
or what role are they in Arabic mythology? Do you know?
They're fire. Yeah, they're fire demons. They're like,
But they're tricksters. They're the
oh yeah.
trickster.
Okay. All
And
right.
so we were talking about, like I said, hero's journey and tropes. You have the jinns who is it where we get the word genie? I mean, they sound obviously
Yeah,
very
it
similar.
is. No,
So
it totally is.
now, like we've talked about with tricksters, go back and listen to our trickster episode. Uh two part trickster episode.
Mm-hmm.
Um they're amoral in the sense that they can bring good effects out, or they can lead the hero to complete his or her journey, but they can also obviously do a lot of malevolent things too, right?
Oh yeah. No,
And
the Jinn, they're like the fairy. of
Mhm.
the Islamic world,
Mhm.
or the Middle Eastern culture or whatever. I like the fact that you brought up that they're amoral. In fact,
Yeah.
it's fascinating if you get into it. The way that they are contextualized within that culture is they are as free-willed as humans are, and
Mm.
so some of them are Muslim. Literally, they worship Allah and
Mm.
practice the Muslim faith, the Islamic faith.
Mhm.
Some of them are not, and they are a separate society that is parallel to human society. And so as such, they have all the colors of good and evil, that whole spectrum.
And why they're kind of like I said, we said they're Arabic, mythological tricksters, but what's their connection to fire? I think they have coals for eyes is part of the kind of,
Well,
imagery for them.
I think they were made out of fire.
And they're
So
yeah, okay.
humanity was made out of the clay, right? Out of the earth.
Mhm.
And the Jinn were made out of fire. Like
Okay.
that's their chemical
So
makeup.
so that's their connection to fire, what they show us about it. If the phoenix is about purification and rebirth, the dragon is about malice and destruction, the jinn, that's the unpredictability of fire.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so you've got because like I said, tricksters can go for they can fight for the good or fight for the evil. They're just kind of out to cause chaos or shake things up, and that's the unpredictability of fire. The almost like the aliveness of it, you could say.
Mhm. Yeah, temperamental, right? And that's why they're such a wild card, especially within that
Mm,
culture. But that's also why they're the most fairy-like.
mhm,
I think that
definitely.
they're pretty much just fairy, for that world. But yeah, and so they can go any which way, right?
Mm. So there's obviously tons of just fire being this elemental reality of human experience, human history. There's more we could have gone into. Maybe we'll have to do a fire part 2 next year, don't worry, or we could do it around Pentecost, Jacob.
Pentecost,
But,
maybe. I
yeah,
have a good
but
idea for when we should do a fire episode, Mike.
but I've got some there's fire in not just our, ancient mythological heroes, but our Christian, quote, unquote, "mythological heroes" in the saints too. So,
Mhm.
I don't know, do you have any, know of any off the top of your head? I've got some too that we can, talk through, but
Well, I like the British Isles. I'm
okay.
a very, very
An
British Isle
Anglophile?
descendant. Well, I think I've told you before, I'm like 70% British Isle in like my little
Okay.
ancestry DNA profile. So ever since then, ever since science told me that I am super British, it's like, wow, I'm going to like own that.
I
I'm going to
always knew there
adopt
was a reason
those.
for this, yeah. Now I
But
can just
anyway,
be insufferable about it, right?
um, St. Patrick, there's a famous story where like the pagans on the island would have like these bonfires, right?
Yeah.
And fire sacrifice was a key part of their religious tradition. And um so one of the things he does is sets up a giant bonfire. How does the story go? It's like
It
bigger than
was
theirs,
Easter
or
Vigil,
he
yeah.
yeah,
And it was on the
and
no, it was the sacred hill where you weren't
yeah, he
supposed to.
climbs. Is that what it was? He takes
Yeah.
over their hill.
Yeah.
But I know it was on top of a hill. I know there's still pilgrimages to this day where like
Mhm.
you'll see people climbing up this hill.
Oh,
But
a high
anyway,
space where, fire happens? That I
can you
wonder where
believe it?
that's gonna
I
yeah,
just yeah.
that's
Um,
there's any
but
sort of biblical precedent for that, that'd be,
well, and so yeah, so he makes a giant bonfire for Easter, right? So that's kind of a cool story. Um,
I tell my students that it's his, big FU to the Druid priests is kind of the
mhm.
basically, which is kinda
Well,
like
and
it's kinda like when, oh, who was it that chopped down the sacred tree?
Boniface.
Boniface, yeah, thank you.
Hmm.
Yeah. So it's kind
Yeah,
of
this is his Boniface
just
moment.
trolling the pagans is what ancient Christianity was all about.
Mhm. Yeah, it's true.
It still can
Well, and
be.
then, so like think about that though. Like St. Patrick, he doesn't go and like do the opposite, right? He doesn't go and
Mhm.
say, "Oh, well, I'm gonna make a giant waterfall off the top of this mountain."
Hmm.
Like he's like, "No, I'm gonna take your game, and I'm gonna make it Christian, right?
Mhm.
And I'm gonna show you what's up," kind
Cultural
of thing.
appropriation. We
He
invented
culturally
that.
appropriated it. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. He took their culture and he made it appropriate.
Mhm.
Um, so
Nice.
yeah, I like that.
So no,
I just made
but
that up.
now the idea was the building the fire was already a thing for Easter, right? And we still do that on the Easter Vigil, where you have the in the West we have the lighting of the Easter candle on Easter Vigil, which is sundown the night before Easter or Easter morning. So this idea, one of the cool things about the Patrick story is that it shows how ancient that practice was. The fact that he didn't come up with the idea of lighting the fire. It was, hey, this is Easter. We're lighting this fire. Now, the fact that, like you said, doing it on the high hill where he was not supposed to do it as a way of saying, our God can beat your God sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But
I wonder if
what were
there's
you
a
gonna say?
biblical precedent for that. But
With a fire?
oh,
Yeah, I know
yeah.
exactly.
Well, all right.
Yes.
So from a Eastern Orthodox perspective here, you've surely heard of the holy fire that descends in Jerusalem on Pascha, right?
Mm.
So, I'll leave that for everyone to just check out on their own, but
Worth a Google?
it's
Worth
worth
a
a Google.
Yeah.
And I'll say this much, it's pretty interesting. There's lots of videos every year, and like you have the people. And so what happens is the bishop goes into the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, I believe it is. Or it couldn't be this. It is a sepulcher. Yeah. Anyway, I think that's true. Well, he goes in there, he comes out, the fire is said to descend from heaven. And when he goes and he spreads the fire out, right? And so everyone has like their big like bundles of candles and things like that,
Mm.
wicks and stuff. And so it all starts getting spread and you can wash your face in it. You can put your hands in it and it doesn't burn.
Mm.
There's videos,
I
Yeah.
that's
Oh, I'm not.
so
I'm basically talking to the audience. Like go check.
yeah, no, for
I don't
sure.
think that you're being hyper skeptical about it. But yeah. So that's actually a really, really significant thing, though, and that fire is really intended to spread all throughout the Orthodox world, and
Mhm.
so it gets carried. This is similar to. Didn't they do this in like Greece? The like Olympic.
The Olympics, yeah.
Yeah, the Olympic flame, and it travels
Well,
all over.
I thought they do that still, not just
And I
when it
think
was
they
in
do,
Greece,
right?
but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Um,
I remember because it was in what, 2004, it was in Athens or something,
mhm.
so yeah.
Well, and so actually, like, so the Orthodox do this every year too, basically, where they actually
Mm.
carry that flame, um, all over the world and stuff like that.
Well, and
So
Jesus, it kinda reminds me of that line Jesus says where it's like, "I've come to set what is it? The world on fire, but would that it had already been inflamed," sort of thing, and so you
does
know what I'm talking
Jesus say
about?
that? I've come to set man against his brother, sons against their father and stuff like that. Bring a sword, but not peace. I don't know if I remember a line where he says,
Luke
"Set the flame on."
12:49, "I've come to set the world on
Ooh.
fire." Yeah. So, I've got 2 saint stories that I wanted to include also, and I don't know if you're familiar with these. We haven't talked about them before. I don't think they're exclusively Western necessarily, but anyway, we'll just kinda see. The first one is Saint Lawrence the Deacon. You have heard of this one. Have you heard this? His story with
I don't
fire?
know if I know the name off the top of my head. No.
So Saint Lawrence the Deacon, his fun story with fire, because nobody can accuse us ancient Christians of nothing if we're not ironic.
Uh
So
huh.
Saint Lawrence the Deacon, he was a deacon in the Church of Rome. He was instructed to bring the riches of the church to the emperor because they hadn't been paying their taxes or whatever. Uh, but he said, bring the riches of the church, and so he brought him the poor, the lame, the feeble, the
Okay.
sick, and he
This
said,
does sound familiar.
these are the riches of the church. Well, the governor, the emperor, whoever, it didn't take too kindly to it, so they arrested Saint Lawrence and they were torturing him. And the way that they were torturing him is they were roasting him over a spit, or not over a spit. They didn't,
Okay.
go and drive
Yeah,
him
I
through,
know
but
this
over a
story for
grill.
sure.
And he
Yeah.
said, "Turn me over. I'm done on this side." And that's how he was.
He's
Now
like the
the
patron saint of smart Alex, right? Like he
well,
has to be.
he is actually. This is the ironic side. He's the patron saint of grillers and barbecuers.
Yeah. I
So,
think you've told me
but
this before.
the other story, which I had actually, the second part of this story I had never heard before. So there's we have a patron saint of firefighters,
Okay.
and it's Saint Florian. Now, like I said, I think this one is more Western than Eastern. Are you familiar with Saint Florian?
I might have heard the
No.
story, but the name I don't know off the top of my head.
So this one is doubly ironic. That's why I like this one. So
Okay.
he was a Roman soldier, but he was specifically assigned to the fire brigade, which goes along with his, patron saint of firefighters. Um, but he was condemned like other soldiers for being a Christian. Now, he said when he was caught and he was condemned to be executed, he says, "Why don't you burn me at the stake, like all the others?"
Mhm.
And so you'd think, oh yeah, he was burned at the stake. Catholics are ironic. That's why he's firefighter. He was not burned at the stake. He was drowned. So we have the patron
Womp
saint of
womp.
firefighters was drowned as the fire that they tried to drown it in water.
Extinguishing it,
So
right?
so
Yeah, okay,
but
cool.
now,
Yeah.
no, like I said, that was a fun because I knew the first part, but it's a kind of a fitting end.
You
Like you
still
said,
can't hear
tell
my
us.
cat mewling, right?
I
I
heard that
remind
one.
you, I am gonna have to edit this afterwards. So if this episode is just nothing but cat mews in the background,
It's atmosphere. I don't know.
there for
Now we're
for the audience that can see, you can see my kitten. This
just
is a good
wants
time to plug
attention.
that we're on YouTube now, folks. So
Yeah,
go check us out on
I
YouTube.
guess. Against some of our better judgments.
Oh,
No, I'm just
all right.
kidding.
This cat's one. I'm just gonna let him out. All right. So sorry. Why don't you talk a little bit to keep our
All right.
audio audience
Well, I'm
listening?
actually going to go into the Bible a little bit, if that's okay. So there's tons of examples, not just of what fire does, but fire has this relationship with who God is. And probably the most obvious example that comes up is in Exodus chapter 3, God's presence is shown in the burning bush. And so that's, I think, if I were to, people who are somewhat familiar with the Bible, that would be like the first example. What I was saying, Jacob, is that
The burning bush.
so fire comes up not just as something to be used, but as a relationship with who God is. And so Exodus 3 is the first, kind of the biggest one. But there's actually two really, really important ones where the author will say explicitly, God is a consuming fire. And we see that once in the Old Testament, and then it's reaffirmed because it's quoting. But again, in the New Testament, we see in Deuteronomy chapter 4, where
Right.
again, God is described as consuming fire. And then Hebrews 12,
Yep.
chapter 12, verse 29, same thing. Now that's going to be really significant because now it's almost like you've got this foundation for when fire shows up. An Israelite or a Christian later on should have that line, God is a consuming fire, sort of in their head. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So it does come to represent judgment in some pretty significant ways. Do you remember the two, at least the two examples that I have? Probably the first one, that one that everybody thinks of when fire represents judgment is what?
Well, there's Sodom and Gomorrah for one, right? I mean,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
obviously fire coming down from the sky and wiping out those two towns. Is the second one you're talking about when Elijah is confronting the prophets of Baal?
Well, so yeah, I understand that one too. That wasn't the other one I had in mind. That one's going to have to do with like worship and sacrifice and all that sort of thing. It was going to be the Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, right? Because they set up the what would you say, the unauthorized fire or the cursed fire, or whatever translation. But there again, it sort of like comes out and consumes them,
Sure,
which should be
absolutely.
significant because this was done in the context of improper worship. And what did the fire do in the context of worship is it consumed the sacrifice, and it was supposed to bring it up to God, right? That's why the Israelites had to burn up the leftovers of their Passover sacrifice, is because then it would rise up to God in the smoke. Well, now we have this other sort of, like I said, this judgment because of the unauthorized fire.
Well,
But you
also
wanted
like
to talk about
Egypt, right? I mean, so one of the plagues on Egypt is fire from the sky. So, fire and judgment. There's a reason why, they go hand in hand, right?
That's why it's the caricature, sort of.
Absolutely, sure. But yeah, I was going to bring up the Elijah story. Is that what you were about to go to?
No, yeah, please go ahead.
Well, so you guys remember from Sunday school where the prophet Elijah calls out the priest of Baal, and he's like, "Hey, if your God's so cool, challenge me to a sacrifice off." Right? So it's kind of like a dance battle, only instead of dancing, it was sacrificing. And they go up to the top
We
of a
came
mountain.
this close to a dance off too.
And that's our next episode. Our
They
next episode is going to be about
voted
dance. Yeah.
between the two, and it was
It
close,
was like
but
it was like
they
that
ended up
scene
going
in
with the
West Side Story where the two gangs are like deciding how they're going to brawl, and it's
It's too
like
tough with
sticks,
priest robes,
sticks,
though.
knives, and they're like,
Yeah.
they're escalating. That's what
Yeah.
happened between Elijah and the priest of Baal.
And
Is
then
like it's like
I don't
sacrifice, like
I
or
don't have sticks or knives. I just got my heart. That's all I can use. That's just my heart, man.
But anyway, so they go and they pray for Baal to go and cast fire from heaven to consume their sacrifices, and nothing happens. And in a classic trolling the pagan way,
Mhm.
the prophet Elijah goes and he douses all of his sacrifices in water, right? Just
Yeah.
saturates them. And then he still calls down fire from heaven, and they consume, and it's so hot it consumes both the sacrifice and the evil priest of Baal. So, he was spitting hot fire.
Yeah. Oh, nice. Well, I mean, that's
Yeah,
very
Prophet
prophetic,
Elijah.
right?
Mhm.
Exactly. Well, and speaking
Oh,
of, so
where
go
you
ahead.
go on? I was about to say,
I
are
was
you
gonna
about to go with a chariot?
Oh, no, I was actually gonna go I was gonna rewind a little bit, because before Elijah, you've got David and Solomon. David, the threshing floor, but then Solomon when they dedicate the temple. Which again, it's just we can go over those quickly. It's just to re-solidify the connection between sacrifice and fire, but specifically fire from heaven. Because fire from heaven in response to a sacrifice, Jacob, believe it or not, that's going to come up later in the story, later in the Bible. But anyway,
Well, and
go ahead.
what should be understood is like there's not a dichotomy between fire from heaven, like consuming sacrifice, and fire as judgment from heaven, right? Because like when the sacrifice is consumed, that is judgment. That is a judgment. I have a theory. If you look at an Orthodox icon of the Last Judgment, what you'll see is it's really cool. Honestly, there's a ton of stuff we talk about, but one of the biggest elements of it is that there's a river of fire that comes down from basically where Christ is seated on high, and it ends in the mouth of the beast, right, from Revelation or whatever. But it's this river of judgment kind of thing. I've noticed that Orthodox churches are set up iconographically to be very, very similar to the Orthodox icon of the Last Judgment. And without getting too derailed into this, I think what that means, because in an Orthodox service, just like in a Catholic service, everyone walks up the center aisle to participate in communion during the service. If it's true that the icon of the Last Judgment is kind of like a symbolic map of an Orthodox liturgy, of an Orthodox church service, well, we form the river of fire as a community when we go to the sacrifice, when we go up to the Eucharist, right? And it is a time of judgment, and it's a time
And
of
you're walking out of the
circumspection.
mouth of the dragon and
Yeah,
into
yeah.
and Jesus came to set the world on fire. And so you guys are all the fire.
The one thing is I've never found this anywhere, and so novelty is not a good thing in Orthodoxy, and so I don't want to be just making this up per se. But I'm telling you, man, one of these days we'll do a little mini episode on the icon of the Last Judgment. I'm gonna like peddle this theory out there and see if I
Well,
get any pushback on it,
well,
because
and here's the thing.
it's crazily
Is
accurate.
the fire I kind of set this whole thing up by saying, the Bible establishes that whenever we see fire in the Bible, we should be thinking of God saying, I am a consuming fire. Or Moses saying, but the Holy Spirit through Moses saying, I am a consuming fire. So if it's already identified with the nature and the presence of God, well, where does that presence of God sit? Where does it rest? Ready for this, Jacob? On the church at Pentecost. There it is.
Whoa!
Yeah. Where does it sit? It sits on the church.
I
And
knew this had something to do with Pentecost somewhere.
yeah, I know. So it was getting there. It was all getting in time, patience, right?
I
It's
should
a
have
slow
trusted you, Mike. Oh,
Jacob. If this episode is nothing but a slow burn, that's what it is. So
yeah, that's
so
right.
so the idea though is that all the stuff that we can apply accurately to God or the presence of God when it comes to fire, right? Go back to Solomon's temple. God was consuming the sacrifice, but God was present in the temple, right? To the Israelite people. Well, where did God's presence rest? After the sacrifice of Jesus, and then what happened, by the way? Remember Passover, you burn up the rest of it so that its smoke rises up to God. What happened with the sacrifice of Jesus 40 days after the resurrection is it rises up to God.
Yep.
And if God was pleased with the sacrifice, God would send fire from heaven, just like Elijah. You already, in the story of Elijah, God was pleased with Elijah's sacrifice, so he sent fire from heaven. Well, God was pleased with the sacrifice of Jesus. He sent fire from heaven and the Holy Spirit on Pentecost. And then we become that presence in the world. We become that river of fire, just like you were saying in the icon.
Sure, absolutely.
But what it also shows us, because remember we were going through the mythological examples, how like this represents the rebirth or the purification, this represents the destruction, this represents the unpredictability, which by the way, the Holy Spirit being talked about as unpredictable, that's right from the Gospels too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is Pentecost is the transformational, right, or transfiguring part, the function of this holy fire.
I think the idea that like kind of rivers of fire, it's not a perfect analogy, I suppose. But then again, I never intended it to be. But the idea that like when we leave church and we bring the church with us, we bring Christ with us out into the world and things like that. Um, when Jesus says, "I've come to bring judgment" and things like that, it's kind of like it has a negative connotation in people's minds because people don't want to be judged. But it's not inherently bad, obviously, right? Because if you're judged forgiven, if you're judged mercifully,
Yeah.
well, we're bringing that judgment too, right? And so, like, it's you just can't avoid the fact that Christ is ultimately a judge, right? And it's not a kind of like tyrannical judge. He's not a tyrannical
No.
judge, though. He's
That's why he
someone
tells the
who's
parable of the just judge, right? Where he does it, I don't have the citation off the top of my head either, but he does tell that parable of the just judge.
so you can, and then famously, when we talk about like hellfire and like the concept of hell, right? The famous adage is that the same fire that hardens the clay melts the wax, right? In other words, everyone goes to the judgment of God, but some people experience it as hellfire, and some people experience it as a melting flame, that melts our hearts and allows us to unify with God and things like that.
Or
Um,
as St. Paul says in First Corinthians, right? Some fire, like everything passes through fire, but some of it is the works are burned up completely, and some of it is refined like gold.
yeah, like
In
gold.
that First
And then
Corinthians 3:15.
and he also says that like be kind to your enemies because in so doing you'll heap fire upon their head, right?
Hmm.
I've heard different interpretations for that verse. Some of them are like a reference to like cultural practices of the time, like people bringing like coals to eat, but they would like carry it above their head or whatever. So I don't know. There's different ways of interpreting that verse, but at the end of the day, I think they all have in common this idea that our lives are a judgment, not just for ourselves, but for the world, right? And so when we go out into the world and we practice mercy and forgiveness and Christian virtues and love, some people will reject that and some people will embrace that. But it's up to us to bring it, right? We got to bring the fire, Mike.
That's right.
Maybe I can start doing sports
Why
analogies.
why not be utterly changed into fire? That's my question for you, Jacob. Did you want to close with our
Nice.
you want to kind of close with our so there's this story that Jacob and I both love, and it's actually the other thing too is it's a there's a band called Me Without You who has it in their it's a lyric in their song The King Beetle. Do you remember that when we listened to that song, talked about that song a little bit? This is like years
Mm,
ago now. But it's a saying from the Desert Fathers. And the sources that I've seen, it says Abbot Lot said to Abbot Joseph. So those that we're
hmm.
just going to go with, that's the two people in the story. But do you want to tell the story, Jacob?
Well, honestly, there's basically he's like, I've done everything. The one because the one guy says to the other guy, it sounds like I'm setting up a joke, right?
Yeah.
The problem, I always get all the names mixed up in the Desert Fathers, so I can never remember like who said what to who. But according to you, it's Joseph and Lot, I guess, and I think that means that Joseph was like, "Hey, I've done all this stuff. I'm doing really well here. I'm doing all the practices right. I'm just wondering what else can I do." To which Abbot Lot retorts, "Why not become like fire?"
Mhm.
Which is a reference to the final transfiguration of us, right? To our theosis, our becoming like
Yeah.
God.
So it goes along with this idea of when he says, "Why not be utterly changed into fire? Why not become like fire?" And in the story, his fingertips turn into lamps, or they turn into flames.
Hmm.
Now, what's interesting about that is that's the menorah in the Jewish temple. Is the menorah had the little
Oh.
flames at the end, and that the menorah was supposed to be symbolic of the burning bush. And so there
Hmm.
again, it's representative of the presence of God that did not consume, right? In the
Hmm.
same way, right, when we take on that tongue of fire at Pentecost, when we receive the Holy Spirit first at our baptism, obviously, continue throughout our Christian life, chrismation as well. But we're becoming like fire, right? And we're uniting ourselves to the presence of God, which, as the Bible says, is a consuming fire.
Hmm.
And so we need to become, we're the lampstands, we're the menorah, because that was the continued burning presence of God, and where it was in the temple. And so you have, these two desert fathers, which it kind of sets up just like the rich man to Jesus, where he says, I followed the law, what more must I do? And he says, go sell everything,
Yeah, it is very similar
and
to
you'll
that
be
story,
perfect.
isn't it?
Now, what's funny about that is, in that story, is Jesus was looking for kenosis. He was looking for emptying, right?
Hmm.
And in the same way, right, that's the final step, is that kenosis. It's that self-emptying, but it's not to become nothingness. That's kind of the whole like Buddhist misunderstanding of it, or the
Yeah,
Buddhist
yeah,
application.
for sure. Yep,
It's not the becoming nothingness. It's self-emptying, so that it's now no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me,
yep,
to quote St. Paul. And so there again, it's all kind of circled around this idea of, God's presence is that fire, right? And for us in the Christian life, the last step isn't doing another thing. It's, you know, taking being able to recognize, or becoming docile enough to welcome in that presence of God and be utterly changed into fire.
yep. And not to put it under a bushel.
Exactly. So, thank you, Jacob, for indulging me for this fire. This very what do you say?
This not Pentecost fire episode.
Yeah. Hopefully we are able to give as much light as we were able to give heat in this episode. Um,
Ah,
yeah,
mm-hmm.
and
I
and
feel downright illuminated.
all right, all right. Thank you guys for coming to listen to. Well, it's fun to finally get off of monsters for a little bit. I don't know. I was feeling a little bit like
Time to move
I don't
on.
know.
Yep,
Yeah. So,
I'm down.
but
Yeah.
But anyway, and we look forward to talking with you guys more. Just don't forget to leave a 5-star rating, like and subscribe, positive review. All that stuff kind of helps us get out there a little bit more, and so we can keep having these fun conversations and making fun of our producer at the end of a episode.
And I'm not fired yet.
Thanks for listening to Voyage Podcast. The Voyage Podcast is a production of Voyage Comics and Publishing, which seeks to create exceptional entertainment informed by Catholic values that inspire people to live a heroic life. Voyage Comics seeks to advance truth and beauty found in powerful stories. To learn more, visit voyagecomics.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.